Hi. All right, here we are. I wanted to add this video in because when I originally made the videos you've been watching from this chapter, it was during the COVID, 2023 COVID thing, and this part was actually deleted. But now you're going to need to know how to calculate equilibrium, right? Real GDP equilibrium in a closed or three-sector economy. And by three-sector economy, I mean, households, firms, and government. Okay? So that's what we're going to do right now. First, let's talk about what are we doing, right? So calculate equilibrium real GDP. What is that? Not difficult, okay? All we're talking about is this. So using the aggregate supply, aggregate demand model, in the short run, so short run aggregate supply, short run or aggregate demand, what is the equilibrium that's being produced in the short run, right? On, again, snapshot in time, any given day. That's what we're calculating, all right? So what happens in this is that you'll be given data. So all we're going to do, recall the past videos we've been watching, in the Keynesian construct, that's sort of the most important, right? Disposable income, can make this disposable income, determines your consumption, it also determines your savings, but that becomes important. In earlier videos, we calculated the break-even point there. You could add in a second sector, a two-sector economy, so firms and households, and all we're doing now is adding in the third sector, the government. So you would be given, or will be given, the following. So what is consumption? Okay, do you remember consumption function? So 100 billion plus a MPC of 0.8, and then income, that's our consumption. For this example, we'll say investment spending is 200, and we'll say government spending is 100. Okay? You with me? All right. Now, the thing that's important to know is that, again, we've been talking about fiscal policy in some of the earlier videos. Anytime you account for government spending in a model like this, you also, where does that money come from that the government spends, in theory? It comes from taxes. So we also have to include taxes. Okay? So I'm going to do this. I'm going to go through once slowly and do the math. So those of you that are a little unsure of the math can actually see how it's done. Okay? So here we go. So what am I going to set up? Again, I erased it already, but that's all we're doing. So we're just setting up this equation to calculate the equilibrium. So if y equals consumption, there's my consumption function. Now, to turn my income into disposable income, how do I do that? Right? You know about this, right? Maybe you have a cousin who says, "Oh, I earn $150,000 a year." Okay, that may be his income, but that's not what he gets to spend, right? What does he get to spend? What's his disposable income? Well, to turn income into disposable income, what happens in your paycheck every month? The government takes out taxes. And so that's what we're going to do here. I'm going to take the taxes out of the income, so taxes of 100, and that turns that into disposable income. All right. And then simply, it's investment spending, 200, and then government spending of 100, and that's it. Okay? So now we solve for y. So again, I'll go through slow. So 200, 300, 400 plus 0.8 times y is 0.8y. 0.8 times 100 is 80. Okay? You with me? So then 400 minus 80 is going to be 320. So y equals 320 plus 0.8y. Okay? Now, to get rid of this, if I go negative 0.8y, that takes that out of the picture. But what I do on that side of the equation, I have to do on this side of the equation. So y minus 8y equals 320. Right, now what do? I reduce and I take the y out. So if I put parentheses around here, I take that y out. So y divided by y is 1. Divided, take that y out, 0.8, 320. And again, this is important, right? So what did I do? Well, y times 1 is y. Y times 0.8 is 0.8y. And all I did was take the y out. This leaves 1 minus 0.8, y 0.2, 320. And then all I do is divide by 0.2. Divide by 0.2 there. And then y becomes 1,600. Okay? You see that? Yeah, Mr. Dixon, I see that, but I'm still not entirely sure what we just did. Look, all we did was calculated this value right here. So now I know in the short run, okay, aggregate demand, short run aggregate supply, in the short run, the economy is producing 1,600. Okay? Now, what are we going to do with that? Well, there's a couple things that we can do, and you should do, just to have some more room to write. I'm going to try to leave that up there. I'm going to take this away. The first thing is, let's look at our multipliers, right? So our spending multiplier is 1 over MPS. So if my marginal propensity to consume is 0.8, my marginal propensity to save is what? 1 minus 0.8 is 0.2, and 1 divided by 0.2 is 5. Okay? And then what you should know is the other two, the tax multiplier and the balanced budget multiplier. The tax multiplier is always 1 less than the spending and negative. So in this case, it'd be -4. And then the balanced budget multiplier is always 1. All right? So what does that mean? Well, if we use this then and say, here, let me give you a couple of examples, right? In this instance, the spending multiplier is, we figured out 5, tax multiplier is -4, and the balanced budget multiplier is 1. Okay, so we figured that out. We calculated the equilibrium real income in the short run, but if I say if full employment real GDP, or the natural real GDP, in other words, long run aggregate supply, what is the target? What's the potential? If I said that was in fact 18, so long run aggregate supply, 18, how would I draw that? Well, if this is 0, numbers get bigger this way, 1,800 would be over here. And what is that? That's a recessionary gap, okay? And how much, so we know we have a recessionary gap, and we know the gap is 200, right? Because 18 minus 1,600 is 200. So from a fiscal policy, right, a Keynesian fiscal policy perspective, how would the government, or how would we close that gap? Well, recall, fiscal policy controlled by Congress are changes in government spending and taxation, right? So the short answer is using these multipliers, 5, -4, and 1, I could close that gap. So if I have a gap of 200, and what amount of increase in government spending would close that gap? Well, I got to close a gap at 200. I know my spending multiplier is 5. So what times 5 equals 200? Or another way of saying that is 200 divided by 5 is what? 40. So an increase in government spending in this example would actually close that gap, causing aggregate demand to shift this way and close the gap. That's one option. The other is a decrease in taxes. So how much would a decrease in taxes? Well, again, my gap is 200, right? And my tax multiplier is -4. So what times 4 would close the gap? So 200 divided by 4 is 50. So a decrease in taxes of 50 billion would again have the same effect and would close the gap. Lastly, the balanced budget multiplier, right? And I can show you this long-handed in the math if you really want to see it. But the balanced budget multiplier says for a recessionary gap, if we increase government spending and increase taxes by the amount of the gap. So that's why it's 1, right? 200 divided by 1 is 200. Then again, that would also close the gap. And those are sort of your 3 options. So I hope that makes sense. Yeah, if it doesn't, leave a comment and I can go through and show you the long-handed math for all of those. But honestly, if you just went through, like, let's just take this first one, an increase in government spending. So if my government spending increase of 40 here, once you work your way down, an increase in 40 here, right? And then if you do the math, 360 divided by 0.2 is 1800, and we just close the gap.